Hello friends, I welcome you all to the Dark Web Association YouTube channel. In the previous lecture, we learned what functions are, how to define a function, and how to call it. We also learned that functions can take input, like the one we just created, and they can return output. However, as you can see, the function we created here, the changeMAC function, does not return anything because it doesn't need to. It only takes an interface and a new MAC address and changes the MAC address for that interface. So, in this lecture, let's continue organizing our code. We're going to create a new function, and as we do that, we'll also have an example of a function that returns a value. First of all, I want to make this tidier. We're going to create our new function here, and we're going to call it getArguments, because I want this function to parse the user input and return the arguments and values entered by the user. Essentially, this function will perform the same task as the code we currently have in place. Here's how we can do it. All we have to do is copy the existing code and paste it into our new function. Make sure there is proper indentation before pasting, so that all of the code will be considered part of the function. Now, I'll clean up a few blank lines, and that's it. We now have a function called getArguments. This function creates our parser object, adds an option for the interface, adds an option for the MAC address, and finally parses the user input using parser.parseArgs, storing the values in options and arguments. However, there's a limitation: the options and arguments variables are only accessible within this function. They are only usable within this block of code. Even if we call this function at the bottom, in the same way that we called our changeMAC function, pycharm will still indicate that options is an unresolved reference. Let me demonstrate. I'll move down in my program and run the same command we usually use. As expected, we'll encounter an error. It's important to learn how to read and understand errors, as they will undoubtedly occur in the future. The error message tells us that the issue is in a file called macchanger.py. This is the file containing our code. The error occurs on line 20, and the message specifies the error type as a NameError. The problem is that the name options is not defined. If we check line 20, we can see that it is underlined in red. This happens because Python does not know what options refers to since it was defined inside the getArguments function. Each block of code is separate from the main program. Even though we're calling getArguments and assigning options, arguments equals parser.parseArgs, the variables are only valid within that function. To fix this issue, we need to modify the code. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to cut the problematic code and replace it with a return statement, return parser.parseArgs. This ensures that when the function is called, it will execute all the code within it and return the value of parser.parseArgs to the location where it was called. Now, when we call the function on line 19, like this, options, arguments equals getArguments, the function will return whatever parser.parseArgs provides, and we can capture its output in the same way as before. So, to summarize, we moved the code that parses arguments into a function called getArguments. This function returns the value produced by parser.parseArgs. When we call the function, we capture its return value in options and arguments, making them usable throughout the program. Now Python recognizes options as a valid variable, so it can successfully execute the changeMAC function. Here's what happens when we execute the program. The script skips the function definitions initially. The getArguments function is called. It parses the user input, processes the arguments and values, and returns them. The returned arguments are captured in options and arguments. The changeMAC function is then executed, using the interface and MAC address provided in the arguments. Let's test this by running the program and setting the MAC address to end with 33. When we hit enter, we get the expected output. If we check the configuration using ifconfig f0, we can confirm that the MAC address has indeed been changed. As you can see, the updated code is much cleaner and more readable. It is also reusable, since the functions can be invoked whenever needed. In the end, we now have the main program reduced to just 2 lines, while the functionality has been encapsulated into 2 functions, getArguments, which retrieves the user-provided arguments, changeMAC, which modifies the MAC address based on the input. If you are new to this channel, subscribe to the channel for more new content like this, and if you like this video, like and share with your friends. Thank you very much for watching the video till the end and for your valuable time.